What if I told you there's one hidden disease that silently takes more lives every year than cancer, yet most people don't even realize they have it? Imagine a condition that clogs your liver, raises your blood pressure, piles fat onto your belly, and slowly shuts down your body's defenses all without warning. And here's the shocking part, it's the common thread behind heart disease, stroke, dementia, even cancer, and yet, almost no one talks about it. Hello, I'm Dr. Nana, and today on Senior Health Boost we're diving into the most devastating disease in the world. We're going to uncover how it does its damage, why it's so often misunderstood, and most importantly what you can do to protect yourself. This disease attacks your body in countless ways. It fills your liver with fat, drives chronic inflammation, increases blood pressure, raises blood sugar, lowers your protective HDL cholesterol, and boosts the harmful, inflammatory LDL cholesterol. It sends your triglycerides soaring and adds stubborn belly fat and excess weight. But it doesn't stop there. It weakens your immune system, cripples your body's natural defenses, and shuts down autophagy, the vital self-cleaning process that recycles damaged cells and keeps everything running smoothly. When this breaks down, the damage ripples across your entire system. That's why this disease fuels nearly every major health crisis we fear. It's directly tied to heart disease, stroke, dementia, kidney failure, blindness, and amputations. It even increases your risk of cancer and makes deadly infections harder to fight. In fact, research estimates that this condition plays a role in more than 95% of all degenerative diseases. So what is this mystery disease? It's insulin resistance. Some of you may be thinking, really? Just insulin resistance? But brushing it off would be a serious mistake. Insulin resistance is the most destructive, costly disease humanity has ever faced, robbing people not only of years of life, but of quality of life itself. Think about it this way. With insulin resistance, people don't just die sooner, they die longer. They spend 10, 20, even 30 years trapped in the slow decline of degenerative disease, dependent on medications, limited in what they can do, and robbed of their energy, mood, and independence. And the numbers are staggering. Cancer claims 9.5 million lives. Heart disease, 17.9 million. Stroke, 5 million. Diabetes, 4.2 million. Add them together, and you get 34.6 million deaths. But when you trace back the root cause, the central mechanism behind them all is insulin resistance and metabolic syndrome. That's why this problem dwarfs even cancer. Here's one more misconception I need to clear up. Insulin resistance isn't black or white. It isn't just something you either have or don't have. It exists on a continuum from optimal health, to prediabetes, to full-blown diabetes. Doctors draw the diagnostic line at an A1C of 6.5 or higher, which means an average blood sugar of 140 mg or DL. But the reality is, damage starts happening much earlier, long before you're officially diabetic. In the last section, we uncovered just how destructive insulin resistance really is, how it quietly fuels nearly every major disease we fear, and how it's not just about dying sooner but about living with poor quality of life for decades. Now, let's take that understanding one step further. If your A1C, the measure of your long-term blood sugar, falls between 5.7 and 6.4, you're considered pre-diabetic. And here's the hard truth. The average person diagnosed as pre-diabetic will progress to full-blown diabetes within just 5 years. That's the trajectory, unless something changes. On the other end of the spectrum lies what I would call true optimal health. In my experience, that means keeping your A1C in the range of 4.8 to 5.1. At this level, your average glucose runs between 91 and 100 milligrams per deciliter. And remember, that's your average. Your fasting glucose should actually be lower than that. Now, mainstream medicine views things a little differently. They tend to treat everything below 5.7 as normal. In fact, many doctors still consider an A1C of 5.3 to 5.6 to be completely fine because technically, you haven't crossed the official pre-diabetes line at 5.7. But here's what I want you to see clearly. If your A1C is creeping into that 5.3 to 5.6 range, you are no longer in the safe, stable zone. You are slipping. Your body is already moving down the path of insulin resistance. Think of it this way: when you're insulin sensitive, your body is steady. You've built a lifestyle that keeps your blood sugar stable, and you're not drifting toward disease. But once those numbers start creeping up, it's not a question of if, it's only a question of how quickly you'll get there. That's why I urge you to take anything above 5.3 very seriously. It's not just a maybe. It's a warning sign. Now let's step back and look at how widespread this problem really is. In the United States alone, about 30 million people live with type 2 diabetes. Globally, the number skyrockets to 463 million. And experts predict those numbers will double within the next 20 to 40 years. Personally, I believe that's an underestimate. Why? Because for every person already diagnosed, there are countless more who are sliding toward diabetes, stuck in that dangerous pre-diabetic or slipping category. Here in the US, there are an estimated 114 million people officially labeled as pre-diabetic. Worldwide, the number is harder to pin down because many countries don't even keep consistent records, but we're likely talking about nearly 1 billion people. And if we include everyone who is slipping not yet diagnosed, but clearly drifting toward insulin resistance, then the numbers are staggering. Over 300 million Americans and more than 2.2 billion people worldwide. Why do I say that? Because insulin resistance is the primary driver of weight gain. And today, more than 70% of Americans are overweight. About 1/3 of the world's population is now overweight as well. Just think about that. In less than a century, being overweight has shifted from rare to normal. To see how fast this has happened, look at the history of obesity in America. Back in the 1800s, obesity was virtually unheard of. By 1900, it was still uncommon. But starting around the 1960s, especially after the post-war boom, something changed. The obesity rate didn't just rise, it exploded. Since then, it has followed an exponential growth curve. And we're not talking about people who are just a few pounds overweight. These are numbers measuring obesity, the severe form of excess weight. Side by side with this, diabetes numbers have surged as well. While not as high as obesity rates, the growth has been just as explosive. And remember, there's a time delay. It typically takes 5 years for someone to progress from insulin resistance into diabetes. For others, it may take 15 to 20 years to move from very mild insulin resistance into full-blown diabetes. That's why you see this lag. Obesity rates climb first, and then, a decade or two later, diabetes cases skyrocket. But make no mistake, these two curves are deeply connected. One fuels the other. Right now, the United States is the world leader among large countries in diabetes, obesity, and overweight populations. But don't think for a moment this is an American problem only. The same pattern is spreading globally. From 1990 to 2020, America set the pace, but other nations are already following the exact same trajectory. It's only a matter of time before they catch up. So where does this all begin? To fix the problem, we first have to understand what insulin really does. Every time you eat, the food travels through your digestive system and is broken down into smaller and smaller particles until they reach the molecular level. These molecules, mostly glucose, enter your bloodstream. But here's the critical point. Those nutrients can't actually get into your cells on their own. They need a key. And that key is insulin. Insulin's job is to act like a doorman, unlocking the cell and allowing glucose and nutrients to move inside. Without insulin, your cells would starve even though your blood is full of fuel. That's why type 1 diabetics who cannot produce insulin at all cannot survive without insulin therapy. They literally have the nutrients in their blood, but without insulin, none of it can reach their cells. So insulin itself is not the enemy. It's absolutely essential. The problem is one of balance. One of the biggest reasons insulin resistance remains so confusing is because it's poorly explained even in medical textbooks. If you search online, you'll often find the simple definition that insulin resistance happens when the cells stop responding properly to insulin. But here's the deeper question. Why? Why would the body suddenly stop responding to something it has relied on for survival since the beginning of time? Does the cell suddenly wake up one day and decide to be stupid? Of course not. Every cell in your body is intelligent. It is constantly seeking balance, what we call homeostasis. Every action it takes, every adaptation it makes, is part of a survival strategy. So when a cell begins to resist insulin, it's not random, and it's not a mistake. It is the cell's protective response. It is doing exactly what it needs to do to guard against overload. If we fail to recognize this, if we think the cell is just misbehaving, we may try to force it to take in more glucose with stronger medication or higher insulin levels. And that approach can backfire badly. Understanding the wisdom behind the body's actions is the key to addressing insulin resistance the right way. And that's exactly what we'll begin exploring next. On the following page, we'll look deeper into why cells start resisting insulin in the first place, and what that means for your long-term health. In the last section, we discovered that when cells begin resisting insulin, it isn't because they're broken or stupid. It's a purposeful, protective response. Now let's dig deeper into what happens when we try to fight against that natural response. Think about it. If a cell is already saying, "I've had enough," and we push more insulin or more medication to force it to take in nutrients it doesn't want, are we moving it closer to health or further away? Are we helping that cell, or are we actually damaging it by overriding its natural intelligence? The truth is clear. When we try to impose our will against what the body is doing for balance, we almost always decrease health rather than restore it. Let me put this into a story. Imagine you're home. One day, a salesman knocks on your door. It's been a long time since anyone came by, so you're curious. You open the door, listen to what he offers, and maybe even buy something. That's fine. But what if that salesman comes back just 5 minutes later? Now you're annoyed. And what if he comes back every 5 minutes, day after day? Eventually, you'd slam the door, tell him to get lost, and refuse to listen. That's exactly what happens with your cells. At first, insulin is welcome. It's the key that unlocks the cell and allows energy in. But when insulin keeps knocking at the door, over and over, your cells start to push back. They resist. And just like you ignore the constant telemarketing calls on your phone, your body learns to tune out the constant demand of insulin. This is insulin resistance, the body's adaptation to being overwhelmed. It's not malfunction, it's survival. Your cells are trying to return to balance and protect themselves from overload. Now, let's clear up a common misconception. Fat often gets blamed as the villain. We see excess fat on the body and assume fat itself is the cause. But is that really true? When you carry excess fat, it's because your body is storing too much and burning too little. That imbalance depends on two processes: lipogenesis, the creation of fat, and lipolysis, the breakdown of fat. When lipogenesis dominates and lipolysis slows down, fat accumulates. And what drives those processes? Insulin. The more insulin resistance you develop, the more insulin your body produces in an attempt to control blood sugar. Insulin levels rise, and with them, fat storage rises. So the real culprit isn't fat itself. Fat is the end result. The true cause lies upstream in sugar, starch, rising blood glucose, and the insulin spike that follows. We know this because we can measure how foods trigger insulin. If we assign sugar and starch a response value of 100, protein produces only about half that response. Fat? Almost none. Single digits. In fact, protein and fat are highly satiating. They keep you full for hours. Sugar and starch, on the other hand, leave you hungrier and craving more. Still, some researchers argue that fat cells themselves are the problem. They point out that fat cells appear more insulin resistant when studied in the lab. But here's the reality. Fat cells didn't just wake up one day and make themselves fat. Insulin made them fat. Sugar and starch triggered insulin. Insulin promoted fat storage, and over time, those fat cells became resistant. So blaming fat cells is like blaming the victim. It's the same way society often shames people struggling with obesity, labeling them as lazy or gluttonous. But it isn't about weakness or lack of willpower. It's biology. Excess insulin is what creates fat storage, and fat cells eventually adapt by resisting further input. Shaming fat cells makes no more sense than shaming the people themselves. The evidence is overwhelming. Look at people who reduce sugar and starch, who adopt low-carb diets, intermittent fasting, or ketosis. They often see dramatic improvements: weight loss, lower blood sugar, better energy. These results highlight the same truth: when insulin is lowered, the body begins to heal. And yet, when you look at what major health organizations say, the World Health Organization, the American Heart Association, the American Diabetes Association, you hear a very different story. They continue to insist that obesity and diabetes are simply caused by too many calories and not enough exercise. They say people today eat more fat, more sugar, and move less. And while there's a kernel of truth in that, it's a shallow explanation. It misses the deeper mechanism. Because here's the real story. It isn't just about calories. It's about hormones. Specifically, it's about insulin. Sugar and starch drive blood sugar up. Blood sugar drives insulin up. Insulin drives fat storage. And when the system is overloaded for years, the cells push back, creating insulin resistance. That's the chain reaction, and it's far more precise than the old calories in, calories out model. So next time you hear someone say, just eat less and move more, remember that it's not that simple. The real battle is with insulin, and understanding that is the first step toward true health. On the next page, we'll dig into this even further, how modern dietary advice often makes the problem worse, and what we can actually do to break free from this cycle. Up until now, we've uncovered the hidden truth about insulin resistance, what it is, how it develops, and how it silently fuels nearly every major disease of our time. Now let's talk about what mainstream organizations recommend, and more importantly, what actually works. Health authorities like the World Health Organization or the American Heart Association often suggest the same old advice: cut calories from fat and sugar. At first glance, that sounds reasonable. And to be fair, they're half right. Reducing calories from sugar is absolutely essential because sugar is the primary driver of high blood glucose, high insulin, and ultimately, insulin resistance. But here's where they go terribly wrong. They also tell us to reduce calories from fat. Unless you're eating extremely poor quality, industrial fats, fat is not the problem. In fact, fat in its natural form like olive oil, avocado, nuts, and fish can be protective. By lumping fat together with sugar as a bad calorie source, they send people down a dangerous path. Then, they double down by encouraging us to increase calories from healthy carbohydrates, things like grains, beans, and starchy foods. Yes, non-starchy vegetables are wonderful. Leafy greens, cauliflower, broccoli, those are great choices. But when the recommendation becomes carbohydrates, it creates the exact conditions that drive insulin resistance. And that's how millions of people move from being pre-diabetic to fully diabetic, following the very advice they were told would keep them healthy. So what does the healthcare system do about this devastating disease? In the United States alone, the system spends over $4 trillion a year on what they call healthcare. But let's be honest, it's not really healthcare. It's sick care. It's the treatment of symptoms rather than the cure of the root cause. On average, that's over $12,000 spent per person, every man, woman, and child. Yet, despite spending more money than any other country on earth, Americans suffer higher rates of diabetes, heart disease, arthritis, high blood pressure, and metabolic syndrome than ever before. And with each passing year, the spending goes up while the diseases become more common. Why? Because the focus isn't on the root cause. The system is designed to treat symptoms, to manage disease rather than prevent or reverse it. Pills, procedures, and expensive hospital stays don't address the engine driving the crisis, insulin resistance. And if you need one more reason to take insulin resistance seriously, consider the global pandemic we've just lived through. During COVID-19, the risk difference between low-risk groups and high-risk groups wasn't 10% or 20%, it was 100-fold. That means people with metabolic issues like insulin resistance were up to 100 times more likely to die compared to those without it. Yes, age was a factor, but why is age such a powerful predictor? Because as we get older, most people become increasingly insulin resistant. That's the real underlying issue. Pathogens like viruses are opportunistic, they attack when the host is weak. And insulin resistance is the condition that weakens the body, making it vulnerable. Now, you might ask, why didn't we just skip all this background and jump straight to the solution? Why not just give a list of steps to follow? The reason is simple: if you don't fully grasp the scope of the problem, if you don't understand why it matters, then you'll never stick with the solution. You'll try it for a few weeks, then slide back to old habits. And as we all know, trying isn't the same as committing. That's why we've spent this time digging into the mechanism and the devastation insulin resistance causes. When the why becomes crystal clear, the how finally makes sense. And once it makes sense, you're empowered to make real, lasting change. So what is the bottom line? Prevention is straightforward. It's not about obsessively counting calories. It's about understanding which foods trigger insulin. Because those foods don't just raise blood sugar, they make you hungrier, which makes you eat more, which drives insulin even higher. It's a vicious cycle. The simplest rule of all: eat real food. That's it. Eat food as close to its natural state as possible. One ingredient foods. Cook them yourself. Combine them yourself, and avoid the man-made processed stuff. Skip the boxes, the bags, the fake additives. The chemicals, the colors, the preservatives, the flavor enhancers. Why? Because processed food isn't really food. It may look like food, it may taste like food, but it doesn't nourish your body. Instead, it interferes with your system, throwing you further out of balance. The biggest danger of fake food is the sugar and processed starch hidden inside. High fructose corn syrup, refined flour, syrups, and chemical sweeteners, all of these drive insulin resistance. On top of that, processed foods are loaded with chemicals like MSG, artificial flavors, dyes, and preservatives. The result? A body constantly bombarded with signals that drive hunger, inflammation, and fat storage. If you're not yet insulin resistant, prevention is easy. Stick to real food. Avoid the processed stuff. Choose leafy greens, whole vegetables, clean proteins, healthy fats, and whole foods that actually fuel your cells. Do that consistently, and you'll give your body the balance it needs to stay insulin sensitive. But what if you're already insulin resistant? What if you've been living with this condition for years or even decades? Reversing it isn't effortless, but it is still possible. The same rules apply but with more discipline. Here's what works. 1. Low-carb ketogenic diet. You'll need to cut carbohydrates much lower than someone who's only trying to prevent insulin resistance. Why? Because your body has already been pushed into years of overproduction of insulin. By reducing carbs drastically, you allow insulin levels to drop, giving your cells a chance to become sensitive again. 2. Intermittent fasting. This is the second powerful tool, and it works hand in hand with a low-carb approach. Instead of eating 6 times a day, cut down to 3 meals. Then, if your body tolerates it, reduce to 2. Some people even thrive on 1 meal a day. The point isn't deprivation, it's restoration. Each fasting period gives your insulin levels time to fall, and your cells time to reset. When you combine these two, low-carb eating and intermittent fasting, you give your body the best chance to reverse years of damage. Step by step, you move away from insulin resistance and back toward health. So as we wrap up, let's bring this home. Insulin resistance is the most devastating disease of our time. It is the silent engine behind obesity, diabetes, heart disease, stroke, dementia, kidney failure, and even cancer. It has cost trillions of dollars, stolen decades of quality life, and taken millions of lives too soon. But it doesn't have to be that way. With knowledge, awareness, and consistent action, you can take back control. You can choose real food. You can cut the sugar and starch. You can adopt fasting patterns that let your body heal. And you can give yourself the gift of a healthier, stronger, longer life. I'm Dr. Nana, and I want to thank you for joining me on this journey. If today's video opened your eyes, if it gave you clarity, or even just one reason to make a change, then please do something simple but powerful. Click the like button, subscribe to Senior Health Boost, and turn on notifications. That way, you'll never miss the tools and insights that could change your health and your life. Remember, true healthcare isn't about managing disease. It's about reclaiming vitality. And that starts with you. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.